Well, welcome to the Report to Community meeting of the Four Towns Regional School District Planning Board. My name is Wendy Foxman. I'm with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, and I'm here. I've been working with the board, providing technical assistance and help, and I'm just here to moderate today. Briefly, just to go through the agenda. Want to make sure everybody has the handouts. They were on the back table there. Should have received this thing with a little puzzle in the corner, giving a background on the activities and the, why the committees and then the board formed. Exploring a regionalization solution for elementary education in Amherst, Leverett, Pelham, and Shutesbury is the title. Then you should have picked up the education plan report on regionalization. This will be presented today. There's another document that goes with this that is not available here, but it will be available on websites, at town halls, town libraries, which are the appendices to this education report. There will also be, and you should have picked this up on the back table, a financial analysis and a presentation on that. Also, this small white questions form. We are asking, we deliberately called today's event a report because the board wanted to give a report to the community, but offer an opportunity for more of an exchange at the forums. And if you see this piece of paper, the yellow piece of paper, it announces the forums that will be held in all four communities, in each of the four communities. And that will be an opportunity for more of an exchange. What we're asking today is, as you are listening, and you're welcome to ask more than one question, but we're asking you to write down your questions, and they will be collected, and we'll read them and respond to them. So, I think that is it for now, and I'd like to introduce Andrew Steinberg, who's chair of the board. Oh, and there will be sign-in sheets passed around. They may be going around now. They are starting to go around, so we'd appreciate it if you'd sign in. And also just a reminder to all the board members, if you do speak or presenters, this is being recorded by Amherst Media, and for the benefit of people here as well, please speak into the microphones. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Wendy, and I'd like to welcome everybody here. Hopefully you can hear me. If you can't, please speak up. I know that acoustics in this auditorium can at times be a problem, and we don't want that to be a barrier. One note on what Wendy just said about Amherst Media that I should add too. For those of you who are from Amherst in Pelham, Amherst Media is available on your cable, and this program will be broadcast as Amherst Media regularly does at various times throughout a period of time after the meeting. It is also available on demand, so if you go to Amherst Media's website, which I believe is amherstmedia.org, they have a meetings on demand section, and it will enable people who have access to the web and can watch programs on the web to see it. And I'm mentioning this so that you can share that with your neighbors if they're unable to attend but have an interest. And one other thing that we've asked Amherst Media to do, understanding that our neighbors in Leverett and Shutesbury, not all of them have the same high-speed internet access that they want to have, that we have asked Amherst Media to make copies of this onto DVDs, which would then be available through town libraries once they've been produced, so that with Amherst Media's help, and we are doing everything we can to make this accessible. So with that extra piece, I would like to introduce myself a little bit and introduce the people at the front table, most of whom are board members. And as Wendy said, I'm Andrew Steinberg, and I'm from Amherst. In addition to being chair of this board, I'm also chair of the Amherst Finance Committee. Now, if you go down to the place that I was sitting until I got up and you start moving to the right, Immediately after is our education consultant, who will be speaking in a few minutes, Malcolm Reed. After Mac Reed is Mark Abrahams, who's a financial consultant, who will give the second report, and Matt Abrahams, who's working with him. The remainder of the people on the table are members of the board. Julie Shively from Leverett, who's also on the select board. Jeff Eisman from Pelham, and Jeff is also chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Becky Torres from Shutesbury, who's also town administrator. On the other side, starting in the center where Wendy was sitting, then Elaine Pulio, who's the member of the Select Board in Shutesbury and is representing Shutesbury. Ann Delano, who represents Leverett, is on the Leverett Finance Committee. Trevor Baptiste is a member of the school committee and the regional school committee from Pelham. Darius Modesto, who's also a member of the Pelham School Committee. Kip Fonch, who's a member of the Leverett School Committee and chair of the Regional School Committee. Catherine Oppie, who is from Amherst and chair of the Amherst School Committee, and Alyssa Brewer from Amherst, who is a member of the Select Board. So this is a really hardworking group who have been doing a lot of work, not just in their many positions, as you can see there, that we are fortunate to have people who are active and informed and involved in their towns, but have been putting a tremendous amount of time into this process so far. And I think as chair, I can't help but say that this board could not be doing what it is doing without the magnificent work that everyone on the board is doing. So with that, I'm going to take just a few minutes to tell you a little bit about the process that we're underway and why we're engaged in this process. So hopefully this, So to start out, we probably should focus on the schools that we have that are currently in place in the 4 towns that we all live in. And we're fortunate to have great schools. And what brings us all together, and has for 60 years, since 1953, are regional schools for grades 7 to 12. And those regional schools are recognized for their quality and the success of our students after their graduation. The regional schools, the middle school and the high school, are overseen by a regional school committee that represents all 4 towns. They work very effectively together and make concerted efforts to look out for the common interests of all 4 towns and the schools that are serving all 4 towns. And they also look out for the interests of each town individually and recognize the need to do both. The elementary schools are also recognized for our quality and the relationships with their communities. And the elementary schools in the 4 towns are right now overseen by 2 school unions. And school unions are groupings that have a superintendent and central office. So Amherst and Pelham are in one school union, and Leverett and Shutesbury are in a second school union. Those school unions have been around since 1901, so these are not new structures. The current structure, though, is complicated, and it's one of the things that we've been looking at to oversee the entire system, pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. Right now, we have 7 school committees. That's 4 school committees, 1 for each town, a regional school committee, and a school committee for each of the school unions. They prepare 5 budgets. They have 5 budgets to manage, 5 separate reports to the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and we have 2 superintendents in central offices overseeing the system, where students all come together in grade 7 for common educational experience from grade 7 to 12. That hasn't changed in 60 years since the current region was set up. And during that 60 years, there have been other changes. And those are kinds of changes that I think that we all need to consider. First of all, demographics of our communities have changed, and we have an aging population on the whole. Our taxpayer base is aging. Our enrollment as a whole in individual towns has been declining. There's been changes in state law because of the State Education Reform Act, and that has had several effects. One, it has redefined the responsibilities of the superintendent and school committees. It's increased state funding and state expectations and oversight, and it has brought us MCAS. One other thing that has happened with the matter of state law and federal pressure, which I'll talk about federal pressure in just a moment, is that we also have a movement towards more charter schools, and charter schools have 2 effects that we all have to be aware of because charter schools are with us. One is it's increasing the decline of enrollment in the elementary schools, and the way that the charter funding formula works is that it affects the funding available to the towns because the towns are paying for the students to go to charter schools. In addition to that, the other things that have been happening in the last 60 years has been there's a real increase in the number of students who qualify for special education, a much more complicated set of needs that special education students provide, and the cost of special education has increased tremendously. And then there's the question of federal regulations and federal education laws, which we read about all the time, and one of that is the creation of a core curriculum. As we look to the future, we need to think about certain elements too. Costs are rising. The state assistance that we're receiving, which goes in with some of the state mandates, it's the flip side of the state mandates, is not rising as fast as the costs are increasing. We know as we project forward that there's going to be a continued decline in enrollment, and that there's going to be a challenge, therefore, to effectively support current elementary and regional schools. The real question that we're thinking about all the time in each of the 4 towns that I think about as chair of our finance committee in Amherst is this system sustainable? Oops. See if I... So, turning quickly to the process that brings us to this meeting. Our communities have been looking at regionalization for a number of years and have considered regionalization in 1968, 76, 1992, and 2009-10. The 2009-10 process ended in large part because we did not have the ability to really dig into the complex financial and educational issues that needed to be considered. At that point, Shutesbury, Pelham, and Leverett created study committees that looked at the educational options in each of their towns, and at the end of that process in 2011 voted to form regional school district planning committees. The Amherst Town meeting also voted to create a regional school district planning committee. Those planning committees are part of a state statutory plan for what needs to be done to consider and, if appropriate, propose to create a regional school system. The committees consist of 3 members each, all of whom are represented on the planning board now, and they are appointed by the town moderator and must include 1 member of the school committee from each town. The committees met during the beginning of 2011, both individually within each town and held joint meetings, and at the end of May had all come to the conclusion and separately voted to form together a 4-town regional school district planning board, which is the next step provided under state statute for the creation or consideration and then possible creation of a new regional district. So we started meeting in June of this year, or excuse me, June of 2012. I guess I forgot the New Year's happened already. And the board began to work immediately, and one of the first things we had to do was to think about, well, how would you set up a regional district that would represent all 4 towns? And we identified the 2 models that are under consideration that you see on the screen. One of the most important things that we did as a board is to learn about our communities. I come from Amherst, and every one of us comes from a different town, and we needed to learn about each other's schools. So for the next 8 meetings that we had each in one of the elementary schools and here in the middle school. And the meetings in the elementary schools were very important because not only did we see the buildings, which was, I think, very valuable, but far more valuable is we met with the principal each time. And the principal made a presentation to us about the strengths of the school, the wonderful programs going on, the way each of the schools relates to the community that it serves, and the challenges that the school confronts. When we met here with the principal in the middle school, the question was, how do the students from all of the elementary schools come together when they reach the middle school and forge their learning from the middle schools and begin the process of being a part of the regional education system? And this is a subject that you'll hear more about probably in a few minutes. About articulation is the word that they talk about, the coordination of curriculum. At that point, we needed to look for the funding that would be necessary in order to support a regionalization study and to do the work that we needed to do, including getting the consultants that you'll be hearing from in a few minutes, and to retain those 2 consultants. We had to identify other issues that we would have to understand in order to regionalize our schools, if that was a step that we determined was appropriate to take. And we had to both identify the issues and understand them and learn about how they could be resolved. One of the things that we also thought about very hard was identifying core values, values that we were committed to in this process. And they are to be good stewards of our schools, to be fiscally responsible, to inform and hear from our communities, to learn about and respect our communities, and to capitalize on the strengths of our good schools. We also recognized that there were a lot of questions that we have to identify, we have to consider as we go forward, either at this stage of the process or if we continue beyond this stage into the future. The financial and educational ones are the ones that you're going to hear about in a few minutes. Financial is what are the costs and savings by regionalizing schools for the 4 towns as a whole, and what is the financial impact on each of the towns, and projection of the future costs and revenues. For education, it all comes down to what's in the best interest of the kids. If we go forward beyond this stage, and you'll hear about that at the end, about what the next stage is, other issues that we have to get into are governance questions. How do we create a school committee that represents 4 towns and complies with constitutional and legal requirements? We have to determine whether school councils or other structures can represent community needs in a regional school structure, and we need to determine whether there are issues that require special attention and voting process in a regional agreement. We also have to think about our schools as community centers, because that's one of the things that we all recognize. We want to maintain our current schools. That is our first and foremost goal. But if that becomes impossible in the future, we need to know what the process would be if we had to consider, if a future school committee had to make that consideration. We have to recognize the relationship between the schools and the towns in which they're located. We have to think about the buildings that we use as school buildings and what their future is. And finally, we have to think about operational issues, personnel, building maintenance, equipment, those kinds of things that it takes to operate a school. So that's a quick overview of the process. And so what I'd like to do now is introduce the first of our two consultants, and Malcolm Reed is an educational consultant, and I won't give you his complete resume, but just to say that Mac has been working in schools in numerous positions, including as superintendent, was involved as a superintendent in Shirley, Massachusetts at the time it considered and then adopted a regionalization with a neighboring school district, and has been working in his own community on a regionalization effort. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Andy. It's always interesting when I hear my real name of Malcolm. I often tell people that the only time I ever heard Malcolm was when my mother was mad at me. I've been Mac all my life, and so I don't hear that very often. It's been a great experience for me learning about your schools and about your communities, meeting a lot of your staff and administrators. I've certainly learned a lot. I've learned things like that Leverett has the oldest continuous and use library in the country, which certainly is an amazing thing. But personally, even more important than that, Matt and Mark took me to Antonio's Pizza Place, and I learned what a great experience and what the opportunities are there. So I will definitely return there. So obviously this is a significant issue. It's important to a lot of people, and this Regional Planning Board has certainly taken this very seriously. There are a number of things in my report that you will see. There also, as Andy mentioned, or Wendy, that there are 26 appendices that go with my report. Some of the things I think you might find interesting, and so those will be available later. But today I'm just primarily going to focus on the issues, the sustainability that Andy mentioned, and some conclusions. So the task that came before the Regional Planning Board and was given to me and to the Abrahams is to determine the educational and fiscal advisability of an expanded region. After the research that I did come to the conclusion that a pre-kindergarten to 12 regional school district would be in the best interests of your 4 communities. But I want to make it very clear that this is not based on any negative things about what is happening now. It is not about your elementary schools, how they've functioned in the past, how they function now. It's about the future, as Andy mentioned about sustainability. What I found is that the elementary schools are doing terrific things. The staff and the administration are very proud of the things that are happening in each of the schools, and the question is whether that can be sustained over a long period of time. I found excellent teachers, excellent administrators, terrific programs, and lots of spirit in each of those schools. So again, it's not about the past or the present, it's about the future. As Andy mentioned, that the board did talk about a number of options, but they boiled it down to only those options which affected all 4 of your communities. And those included a pre-kindergarten to 6th grade separate regional school district that goes with your current 7 through 12 region, and the second option being a pre-kindergarten through 12th grade, 1 regional school district for all 4 towns. Had quite a process. I reviewed a lot of materials. If you've looked at the website that the Regional Planning Board has, it's extensive, has a lot of information on there. I interviewed 22 individual people. I interviewed several groups from schools, and I interviewed and talked with members of other communities who are going through the same process. I just want to say that I appreciated Superintendent Garrick and the administrators here in the Amherst Regional Public Schools, Joan Wickman and Union 28, and the access I had to those schools. And I most specifically had individual conferences with groups of teachers in Leverett and Shutesbury who perhaps might have the greater concern of this process. A lot of work has been done already, and as you can see, that the Regional Planning Board has taken this very seriously. It seems to me, from my experience and what I've learned here, that all the issues and questions boil down to these 3 things. They can all somehow be fit into educational issues, governance issues, and financial issues. So some of the educational issues. And what I found is that generally those educational issues are personal to people. There are parents who are concerned about what's going to happen to my school, what is going to happen with my child in my school. They want to know is there going to be an elementary school in every town that Andy alluded to? Would there be a guarantee that my child could go to school in my hometown? What about special education services? One of the things I'll mention a little bit later is obviously there are greater opportunities and a bigger system for services for children with special needs. How many grades are going to be in my school? I know that's been an issue here. I'll speak to that in a minute. And is there some way that we could balance average class sizes so that we can maintain the elementary school in my building? So often the educational issues are very personal. The uniqueness. I heard the word unique I don't know how many times in my trips out here and communicating with people by email and by phone. It's true that each of the elementary schools have a lot of unique characteristics. I focus especially on those in Leverett and Shutesbury. Again, I think there are some more issues with staff there, wondering what might happen in a bigger region. But I found there was a lot of similarities. And actually, if you don't have this available, but on the Appendix 19 of my report, each of the principals wrote a document stating how they felt their own elementary school is unique. And the interesting thing I found is they definitely are unique, but there are a lot of similarities between those schools. They showed a lot of pride in the kids' academic performance, special programs, the arts, the excellent teachers that they have, and the commitment from parents and families. All of them mentioned those kind of things. So if there is going to be greater regionalization in these 4 communities, it's imperative that the uniqueness of each of your elementary schools is maintained. The autonomy. I heard this a lot too from staff. Staff in elementary schools feel like they have a lot of ability to decide which textbooks to use, which curriculum to use, and they have some concern about losing that ability. So it is going to be important that, and if anything changes in terms of regionalization, that teachers and staff and administrators still feel like they have some input into that process. Parents, I know, feel pride in certain programs that happen in their children's schools, and they want to make sure that those change. So obviously, it's obvious to me that if anything changes in terms of regionalization, it'll be important for the administration and the school committee to make a commitment to keep that local autonomy. Now, that doesn't mean that individual teachers or groups of teachers should decide exactly what should happen in the schools, but they certainly should have a big say in it. Other things I heard were, would regionalization equalize programs in schools? Well, on the one hand, you could say, well, that might be a good thing. So if a school needed some support in a specific area and they could be brought up to the level of the other 5 schools or 4 of the other schools, that would be good. There's also concern the other way, that somehow regionalization would lower standards in elementary schools to the lowest common denominator. I don't think that's something that, obviously, could that happen? It could, but certainly no superintendent or school committee would be interested in doing that. So it's important, to, as I said, not to lose that uniqueness. Maybe you don't want to equalize everything. You'll see in the report, and especially in the appendices, that there's a fairly significant difference in the amount of minutes a week that children have in going to their specials, music, art, phys ed, library, technology. So that doesn't mean that's bad. It just means they have some different values of the use of their time. So that doesn't have to change, obviously. So the regionalization, I believe, provides opportunities to review the programs in all the schools, to establish some system-wide priorities, to align the current programs with local interests and the state and national requirements that are coming to all the schools. I won't go through all this. Andy did mention this. I think if you were to ask someone in a business organization if it made sense for in this case, 4 communities to have 7 different school systems, most people would say that probably isn't the most efficient way to do things. Obviously, it works, and it can continue to work. If you went with a new pre-K to 6 regional school district and kept your 7 through 12 district, that would mean you would be going from 7 groups of oversight to 2. And it was mentioned to me last Thursday night, which I hadn't seen, that your current regional school committee says that your school committee members are appointed by each of the individual elementary school committees. So an elementary school committee in Shutesbury, for example, picks the person that's going to go to the regional school committee. Obviously, if you have a pre-K to 6 regional school district and a 7 through 12 or a K to 12, obviously that would have to change. So if you go to a pre-K to 6, that obviously would have to change in your current regional agreement. If you go to a pre-K to 12, then obviously the regional agreement is going to be changed anyway. So again, focusing your whole district on one set of eyes from a school committee and a superintendent. One of the issues that will confront you is, should the region own the buildings or should they lease the buildings? There are certainly positives for doing both of those things, and many regional school districts obviously do both of those things. If the district owns the building, generally they buy them from the town for a nominal fee of $1, and that means that the regional school district is now responsible for the maintenance, insurance, and snow plowing and lawn mowing, all those things that have to happen. That doesn't mean that they might not purchase those services from the town as they're doing now. The other thing that we found in some other school districts, some people are concerned that the region would buy a building for $1, 20 years from now not need it, and then sell it for $2 million and reap the benefits. So some of the regional agreements that I've seen would say if the school system no longer needs it, they must sell it back to the town for the same dollar that they purchased it. Leasing, the law only allows you to lease a building for 20 years. It also allows the regional school committee to add 20 years to that at their discretion. So technically, you can lease a building for 40 years. And then, as now, the town would still have some responsibilities for maintenance and lawn mowing and snow plowing and pretty much the way it's happening now. Financial issues. One of the major differences that would happen if you make this a region, or not 2 regions or 1 region, is right now the budgets in each of your towns are in 3 parts. There's the municipal budget, which is fire, police, and libraries, and all those local things. Then you have an elementary budget. Then you have the regional assessment, or the budget for the region. If you were to regionalize, obviously that would change, in that one part of your budget would still be the municipal budget, and the second part would be an assessment from the region. If you have a pre-K to 12 region, obviously it would be just 1 assessment. If you have the 2 regions, it would be 2 assessments. So Mark and Matt Abrahams, as they did their work in looking at the financial issues, which you will talk more about, there are definitely some savings that are going to take place if you were to regionalize. One is, right now you're getting reimbursement for 7 through 12 students who live greater than 1.5 miles from their school, either the middle school or the high school, and there's a reimbursement. It's about 55% this year. If you regionalize your elementary schools, that would bring in, we estimate, another $262,000 to the region. Right now, the state is still trying to encourage people to regionalize. There is a bonus aid that is not technically in the state budget, but has been paid to every new regional school district over the last several years that have come into existence. And that is $50 per head in the first year, and it goes to $40 the second, $30 the third, and so on down to 0. So it's $80,000 in the first year, and it would mean $240,000 to the district over the course of 5 years. Currently, Shutesbury and Leverett are spending about $274,000 for central office services to Union 28. We'd assume that those would be transferred into another union with these 4 communities. Medicaid is a little bit different in that $250,000 would come into the school district, but it is currently going to the towns, mostly to Amherst right now, so it's really a transfer of money from one to another organization. So it's not actually new money, but it would be new money to the region, obviously. And it's been determined that the central office here could absorb the other 2 towns without adding any staff. So that obviously means that the savings of the $274,000 would all be savings. There are obviously other things that Mark will talk about and that you will see in my report and my appendices that are less significant dollars. However, there are some additional costs. One is that the law requires that there only be 1 contract for each of the bargaining groups that are in the organization. Obviously, the teachers are in a bargaining unit, the custodians, the clerical staff. Here you have an assistant principal's bargaining group. They all have to be, that has to be 1 bargaining group. And that's a process that goes through there. But in the worst case is that if all of the teachers from all of the 4 towns were put onto the same salary schedule, it would cost nearly $270,000. Now, that's something that has to be bargained, so it's not an exact number. The law only requires that any teacher cannot make less money or have less benefits if they come into a new region. The law does not cover anybody other than who are considered teachers. So custodians, clerical, and whatever, the law doesn't cover them. But we would assume that the regional school committee would do the right thing for all groups. There's a number there of $177,000 for technology infrastructure. Obviously, that's something that should happen. It probably doesn't all need to happen, but it's in Mark's numbers. Another thing is there has to be 1 health insurance plan, and your 4 communities have different health insurance plans, some of which are generally with the schools in the town, and each town have different ones, and it's estimated that it would cost about $76,000 to put everybody in the same health insurance plan. There are obviously other financial issues, again, that Mark will address. So the bottom line is, with all the ins and outs, it looks like there would be about $500,000 of savings or benefits to the 4 communities collectively if they were to regionalize, either with 2 regions or 1 region. Now, in that number is the $80,000 of the bonus aid that I mentioned, but it's clear to me that over time there will be efficiencies that will be realized that will more than offset that as that bonus aid declines. The Regional Planning Board looked at, or was thinking about, is there a modular plan? And Andy mentioned this to some degree. What would happen if one of the town drops out of this process? So generally it would happen in one of 2 ways, either between now and when the communities vote on this, if that's what's going to happen. One of these groups of 3 people might say our town is going to drop out. At that point, it would be certainly feasible for the 3 members from each of the other 3 towns to say, we want to form a new regional planning board, we've done a lot of work, and we'd still like to go forward. It also could happen that if your communities do get a chance to vote on this, and one community votes no, and the other communities vote yes, the other 3 regional committees could again vote to get together and have a 9-member board instead of a 12-member board and continue the process. There we go. So there seems to be, from my listening to a lot of people here, there are 3 issues that we hope will not get entangled in this issue of whether you should regionalize at this point. That is, what's going to happen with the 6th grade. As you probably heard, there's some discussion about whether the 6th grade should go to the middle school or come to the middle school or not, and that's not going to be part of this discussion. School closings, Andy mentioned that some of the schools have declining enrollment and are very small, and if they continue to get smaller, what will happen, and that should be left to a future school committee. And what about facilities renovations? We know that 2 of the schools in Amherst are in need of some attention, and that probably would happen in the foreseeable future, but it won't be exactly part of this process. And you mentioned the word sustainability. That's where I think the bottom line is. Again, as I said, not about the past or the present, but can these 6 elementary schools sustain what they have now? We know that in Pelham, for example, half of the students in that elementary school are school choice students. And if they didn't have that other half, they really wouldn't have enough students to have an elementary school. We know that in Leverett and Shutesbury, there are very small classes there, as small as 12, I believe. And what would happen if that became 10 or 9? Is the community still willing to support that? So as Andy said, there are budget pressures, the costs are rising faster than the levy limit, faster than what you could raise the money without a Proposition 2.5 override. I was told in Leverett last week or a couple of weeks ago that the school has not had a raise in its budget for 4 consecutive years, which has obviously created some cutbacks over there. So obviously there's an issue about sustainability. The other thing is about budget flexibility. I'll just give you a little analogy. If you have 3 children and you in your mind have somewhat of a budget for them and say, well, I have this much money that over the course of the year for clothes, for schools, for transportation, for some fun, whatever, I have this much money for each of my 3 children. But one of those children now decides, or you decide that they need braces. Well, probably you aren't going to say, well, I've only allocated this much money of our family budget for this child. I'm only going to put braces on half of his teeth. You're going to say, well, I'll find the money over the course of the bigger budget and make that happen. Well, that's what the current school system is happening right now. Superintendent Garrick has 3 different budgets. If a boiler goes in the elementary school, she cannot say, gee, we can take some money from the high school budget and fix that boiler. The money cannot cross these 3 different districts that you have here. But if you were in a pre-K to 12 region, you can manage it like you would your family budget and say, okay, we have an issue here, we'll have to take some money over here to fix that. That's definitely a huge advantage for a regional school district. So there are some concerns, obviously. I try to summarize them. I mentioned some along the way. The staff and some parents have concerned about local autonomy, what would happen to their programs, what would happen with staffing. For example, when I was meeting with the Leverett teachers a couple of weeks ago, it was mentioned to me a concern that if a teacher in Pelham, for example, were going to be reduced because they needed one less teacher, could that teacher come over and bump a teacher in Leverett, and a nice new young teacher might lose their job? Yes, that could happen in a bigger region. But the other side of the coin is, from what I found where I live in the discussion with the teachers there, is those teachers said, well, I'm concerned about the enrollment going down in my school. I might lose a job. But in a bigger region, there are other openings. I would have access to openings that are in any of the other elementary schools. So I guess that works both ways. The Selectmen, Finance Committee, taxpayers obviously have an issue with another chunk of the local budget becoming an assessment to the region. There's an issue about maintaining the uniqueness of each of the elementary schools. There's some issues about individual school committees that are responsible for your elementary schools being merged into one school committee, and certainly the issue of what would happen to Union 28 if Shutesbury and Leverett were to get out of that union. There are obviously lots of positives there as well. Would eliminate the duplication. I think Andy mentioned about state reports. Certainly the Superintendent Garrick, Superintendent Wickman can appreciate the fact that there are 110 reports that every school system has to submit to the state every year. So here, the superintendent is doing 330 of those reports. And just think what the superintendent, other people who are responsible for those reports, the business office and the curriculum people, could do with the time if they were not duplicating that 3 times. They could focus on kids and education. You'll see in the Appendix 12, which you don't have, from Rob Detweiler, the business person here, who's estimated the amount of time he is spending duplicating all of these reports from his point of view. And he's just one piece of all of those, obviously. Obviously, you could align the curriculum, both with the state standards and the Common Core, and especially that would be more easy with a pre-K to 12 region. There are budget efficiencies and economies of scale. A single budget would be more transparent. When you go, whichever town you live in, if you need to figure out how much money the town is spending, you have to look at your elementary budget, you have to look at the secondary budget, and you have to look at the regional, the union budget. So the budget would be in one place. I think it would be more transparent, easier for everybody to see where the money is being spent. Another thing is the MSBA. If in fact you need to do some renovation at Fort River or Wildwood in Amherst, the Massachusetts School Building Authority gives additional points or percentage reimbursement points if you are a new region. Another few positives here. With your declining and limited enrollment, region could offer some creative things. Now, these did not come from the planning board, so don't look at them and say, gee, did they come up with all these crazy ideas? But one thing, some of your schools have school choice, and I know at Shutesbury has agreed that they don't want school choice, but perhaps you could market the schools more to include kids and bring in that money from other towns. Maybe you could make magnet schools of 1 or 2 of your elementary schools. That would be a science math school or a technology school or an art school or something. So there might be other creative ways that you could look at the elementary schools as a whole that would allow them all to stay open. Special education options, we know that's not an issue in Union 28 right now, but all it takes is 1 student or 2 students who have significant needs, and having a bigger organization could minimize the cost for that. Having a single school committee policy and long-range planning by one group for the all K to 12 would certainly have some advantages. I mentioned the additional state reimbursement, $500,000 of savings, smoothing out the peaks and valleys of the budget issues as you go along, and sustainability. I'm not going to really talk about these transition issues. Between the time you vote, if in fact you do vote, and if you vote for some kind of regionalization, between then and the next July 1st, a region can only start on a July 1st. In your case, as your timeline, it's about a 6-month window, 6 or 7 month window. It's a very short amount of time to accomplish a lot of things, and I think you'll find that you'll have to really be busy to make that happen. So we'll get back to the beginning. 3 things it all boils down to: the educational values, governance, and finance. The education is, will this help you focus on education? Will it promote the uniqueness of your elementary schools? For governance, can it help align the curriculum pre-K to 12 and align your school committee policies? And finances, can it add flexibility to your budget and efficiencies and savings that you will maintain for a long time in the future? So just before I finish, I just would like to mention those several people who have really helped me a lot. Wendy Foxman, as you know from the Pioneer Valley, has been great. It's at the end of the email and the phone, and I certainly appreciated her support. Andy Steinberg, I think that nobody in the community, perhaps most of the people on the board, will realize how much time he has spent at this. I know the time he spent with me in our conversations. I can tell he spends a lot of other time on this process. Maria Garrick, who's your superintendent, who has also facilitated all the things, all my appointments over here, and I've appreciated that, Maria. Joan Wickman, I'm not sure if she's here or not.
Yes.
Where are you? Oh, okay, all right, thank you. She also facilitated my efforts over in Leverett and Shutesbury, and got a lot of information from her, which you'll also mostly see in the appendices. And Mark and Matt Abrahams, who I said did the best thing by pointing out Antonio's for me or taking me there, but we've been working with him. I've worked with him on other projects, and you'll see that they know what they're doing. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Mac. And I wanted to remind you that if you have questions, we did hand out forms. We really urge you to please jot questions down, and we'll have somebody coming around on each side to pick up questions, because we would like to make sure that things that are occurring to you as you're hearing the reports get recorded, and we have a chance to ask our consultants to respond to them. I'm now going to turn this over to our financial consultants, Mark and Matt Abrahams. And again, I'm not going to go and play the thing of doing a whole resume, but just to say that Mark's experience working for the state, working for schools, working for towns, and teaching, and his experience as a CPA positions him as one of the lead financial experts in school finance and school budgeting. And so we're very, very fortunate to have him. And this process really underscored how difficult that was. It was frustrating for some people in the community that it took so long to get a financial report available for people to look at. And there was a reason that that happened. We have an extraordinarily complex system, as you've been hearing about, and it took time to get the reports from the schools and to get the reports merged into the same format, since each school uses its own formats for reports, and then to get information where needed from the towns to put it together, and to make sure that the information was being correctly analyzed and done. And I just really appreciate and respect the amount of time that Superintendents Garrick and Wickman and their staff, including Mike Cacella, who works with Superintendent Wickman, and Rob Detweiler and his staff, who work with Superintendent Garrick, put into this process, as well as the treasurers and administrators and staff in the four towns themselves to provide the information, and the incredible work that they did to put it together. And it was that complexity that you're going to that caused the time to be required, but the perseverance of the two people that you're about to hear from is the result of that perseverance. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, and I think that, are you going to speak up there? Okay.
Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So my challenge is to take all of this financial data, make it clear and concise in what I hope to be about 20 minutes. So you have the PowerPoint titled Financial Analysis. Our objectives was to determine the estimated fiscal impact of regionalization, the two models, pre-K through 6, plus your 7 through 12 region as one option, and then number 2, pre-K to 12. So this is a presentation of estimated numbers and the fiscal impact, and these numbers are what we consider collectively reasonable estimates, and will change should this effort go forward. So our process was to look first at the pre-K to 6 to develop an elementary regional budget, gross, and then begin the adjustment process. For example, as today, as 4 elementary districts, you would have choice students coming in, choice students going out. And if they're intra the new district, then those choice revenues and choice tuitions offset each other and become revenue neutral. But we have to deduct that from the numbers. We also, as Mac mentioned, discussed several transitional issues and then ultimately identify current resources. What we want to do is to really get the 4 elementary different budgets together as one regional elementary budget and get down to what we call an amount to be assessed. And then that assessment amount would be run through assessment methodologies. And you'll hear 2 types of assessment methodologies. A regional district gets its money from several sources. One of the major sources are the assessments to the communities. And the 7 through 12 region essentially uses a 5-year rolling average for enrollment as the basis to assess the regional costs to the 4 communities. So we're using that particularly at the elementary level and then the combined regional level. But also there's a second methodology allowed by law called the statutory assessment. And that's a different methodology that you'll see. Both methodologies recover the same amount of costs, but it impacts each town differently. And you'll see those numbers. So our next process was to develop the statistics for the assessment data and then to actually calculate the assessments. And that's why we call this an estimated fiscal impact for both the pre-K to 6 as well as the pre-K to 12 regional districts. To support this PowerPoint, several workbooks. The first on the left is the primary workbook for the pre-K through 6, which has a summary tab and then a tab for the regional budgets, taking all 4 regions, getting them on an even playing field, and developing the regional budget for the 4 districts. As Mac noted, backing out the Union 28 from the regional budget, adjusting Chapter 70, which is the primary source of funding for elementary and secondary education in the Commonwealth, Chapter 71 is your transportation reimbursement. As Mac mentioned, the elementary district would, for the first time, be eligible for transportation reimbursement, estimated at $262,000. Your 7 through K currently receives that transportation reimbursement, but as individual elementary districts are not eligible for transportation reimbursement. CB is the circuit breaker, where we've done a separate analysis in circuit breaker, and as Mac mentioned, bonus aid for any new region regionalizing in the Commonwealth. Transition issues, current resources. What are you currently paying today as a community? What would you be paying as a community for a pre-K to 6 district, plus your 7 through 12 assessment? And what would you be paying as a pre-K to 12 district under your current 5-year enrollment methodology and under what we call the statutory methodology? All those numbers are pulled from this financial analysis, resulting in those major milestones. The assessments, the enrollment data, the assessment data, and as Mac mentioned, both the compensation and benefits analysis to bring up the lower compensation and benefits to the higher level. And then, like any good accounting exercise, budget exercise, tying it together to make sure that what we've done does reconcile. In addition to that main workbook, we also have the regional budget workbook, what I call the Chapter 70 final numbers for fiscal 13 in net school spending, because Chapter 70, again, is a major source of funding. A separate tab, a separate workbook for backing up the compensation and benefits, and then an additional pre-K to 12 region. So a lot of financial data. And as Mac mentioned, several credits, and I won't go through the list again, but a special thanks to Rob, to Sean, to Mike, who spent countless hours with us just brainstorming these financial numbers. It's one thing for consultants to come to you with a set of numbers. It's another thing to bang these numbers through constantly to make sure that what we believe to be the fiscal impact has been thoroughly flushed through with the people that are currently doing your accounting and budgeting and reporting in your elementary districts. So a special thanks to them. So looking at the financial analysis, first question, what are the 4 towns paying today for pre-K to 6 education? So we start with the fiscal 13 school budgets, again, associated with the pre-K to 6, including the town costs. So on the left, you see the communities, and we have gross amounts. And then we deduct out other revenues. Those are your special revenue funds, your grants, non-general fund tax levy revenues. We deduct out Chapter 70, because that is a state resource, to get down to what we call net. So Amherst, Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury each have a different number, and the total net amount, tax levy money, is $40.9 million. When we talk the term current resource in this presentation, we're referring to tax levy dollars. And it includes town-based costs and school-based costs. So Mac earlier mentioned you have 3 budgets at the elementary level, the municipal side, the school elementary budget, and then the regional assessment. Part of that is what the term is Schedule 19, and that's a technical state form, one of those 110 reports. But Schedule 19 represents the costs incurred by your towns on behalf of the schools that are paid for by the town. So debt service, paid for by the town. associated with school construction. Your regional assessment is paid by the town, but it goes to the 7 through K region. So it's important, since your town costs today are borne by the town, directly by the town, and they don't go through an assessment process, that we keep that cost separate from the amount to be assessed, and then add that back to get to the true town costs. So 40.9 million net. But at the same time, look at that 50.8, because that is the gross budget where this process starts. So the big picture, pre-K to 6, starts with that $50,800,000 for the gross regional budget, subtracts out the town-based costs to get to roughly $30 million. And then we subtract out a number of common revenues. The revolving and special revenue funds, the grants, $2.8 million. Chapter 70 simulated for the region, $6.9 million. The transportation reimbursement, $262. The circuit breaker, $17. The Chapter 71 bonus aid, $79,700, Mac rounded that to $80. Medicaid reimbursement, $250. And the intra-district choice that I mentioned earlier is a reduction, but then we see the offset below. So individually, the $2.8 million, again, is the aggregate of all your state grants, all your revolving funds within each of the 4 towns. Chapter 70 simulated, $6.9 million. The Chapter 70 formula is computed for every municipality in the Commonwealth. And then as municipalities form a region, a piece of that contribution computed by the state is apportioned or allocated to the regions that each community belongs. So when today, fiscal 13 numbers, which is the base of this presentation, you are receiving a set amount from the Commonwealth through Chapter 70. When you form a region, so now the 4 elementary districts would now form a region, and that Chapter 70 shifts from the town to the region. And we, working with the state, saw a slight adjustment, not to Amherst, not to Leavitt, not to Pelham, but to Shutesbury, of roughly $7,000. So if you don't regionalize, Shutesbury would get an additional $7,000 in Chapter 70 aid, fiscal 13. As a region, there's this thing called target share, and in the computation, the region would lose out of that $7,000. A minor adjustment when it comes to Chapter 70. As Max said, you would receive $262,000 of transportation aid. So that comes off your Schedule 7s of the end of the year report, which we analyzed, we sent to the state. We worked with Jay Sullivan at the state, who is the person that calculates transportation reimbursement. And based on 55% reimbursement today, you would be eligible for $262,000, Chapter 71, transportation reimbursement. Heretofore, you would not be eligible. Now, we said estimated numbers, so if that 55 reimbursement changed to 54 or changed to 56, all these numbers would change. But for today, $262,000. In your budgets, you have estimated your circuit breaker reimbursement. Again, we worked with the state and got the actual reimbursement number for fiscal 13 and made that adjustment. So your regional budget was understated by $17,000 when the actual numbers come in. Chapter 71, Section 16D provides for bonus aid, as Max said, sliding scale, $50 per foundation enrollment, first year, 40 the second, 30 the third, 20, 10. Now, foundation enrollment is a different measurement of enrollment than your 5-year rolling average. Nonetheless, it is a state-calculated foundation enrollment number, and running it through the numbers, roughly $80,000. Again, another benefit as a region that the four towns would enjoy that they currently do not receive. Medicaid reimbursement, approximately $250,000. So each of the elementary schools process special education, and they can seek reimbursement from the federal government. That money, under Mass General laws, goes directly to the towns. When the four elementary districts form a region, that money would come to the region. So it's not new money, it's monies that already come to the four elementary districts, primarily Amherst, but as a region would now go to the region. So it's really not new money, but it is new money to the region. Inter-district choice would be a reduction of those revenues. So we go from 30 million roughly, minus 10, down to approximately 20.2 million. And then we start looking at adjustments. And a lot of these adjustments get into the transitional issues that Mac was discussing. What we discussed with the board was how do we present transitional costs when in many regionalization experiences, these transitional costs take more than 1 year to fully implement. Contract negotiations might go on for a couple of years or 3 years as opposed to 1. What do you do with a integrated technology? What do you do with integrated software systems, your new financial management system? 1 year or 2 years. So what the board asked us to do is to come up with a reasonable estimate of ongoing costs and to keep separate one-time costs. So what you see here are the ongoing costs, such as the compensation adjustment, the fringe benefit adjustments, all in 1 year, but not those costs that might take more than 1 year, so that, that would be just a one-time cost are not included. Nor is included any what is called transitional aid. And we'll talk about transitional aid toward the end of this presentation. So when you look at the adjustments, including the amounts of money that would no longer be paid out of the Leverett and Shutesbury budget to their superintendency union, and the interdistrict choice expenses, we see a reduction going from 20.2 to 20.1 or 20.2 million as the net amount to be assessed. So a lot of financial data on that one slide. So that 20.2 million to be assessed, how do we assess that amount to the four towns? Under Mass General Laws, Chapter 70, Section 6, the technical term is the alternative measurement method, the assessment method, which is the current method or the agreement method, whatever the towns agree to, which is your 5-year enrollment average, rolling average. The second type is the statutory assessment. Well, what's the difference between the two? The statutory assessment, first step, is to include what is called the required local district contribution. What does the state say is the minimum required local contribution of each of the four towns to the region? This is a state computation based on wealth of a community and some other factors, whereas your 5-year rolling average of enrollment is not based on wealth. It's based 100% on enrollment. That's the major difference between the two assessment methodologies, and you'll see some differences on the assessments to the four communities in later slides. So under your current assessment methodology, what would be the assessment for the pre-K to 6 region for the four communities? So we have on the left the net amount to be assessed, the 20.176 that we saw on the second previous slide. And then we add back those town-based costs that we originally removed from the amount to be assessed. So Amherst would pay roughly $31 million, Pelham 2.3, Leverett 3.0, 3.1, Shutesbury 3.5, and we're back to the $40.6 million number. Under the statutory method, remember the first method was strictly enrollment, statutory method introduces wealth. Now we have 3 rows on the left. We have the required local contribution inserted there for roughly $10.6 million of the 4 towns. Again, a computation made by the state. The net amount to be assessed, the town-based costs, and now we have a total of 31.6 for Amherst, 2.3 for Pelham, Leverett is 3.2, Shutesbury 3.2, 3.3, the same $40.4 million. So what can we learn from that? How does that compare with the current resources? Again, what's current resources? Tax levy, today's cost. What you are spending today from your tax levy. Not the revolving funds, not the grants. And current resources are sufficient to pay for the fiscal 13 assessments. All for the same dollars, but as we saw, different impacts on the communities. So how do we compare? So let's take a moment on this slide. So we have 2 sections on this slide. The current methodology, which is the enrollment methodology, and the statutory methodology, which introduces wealth. So on the left, you see, or on the top, you see the same numbers under the current methodology, each of the 4 communities. First, on the assessment, that's this total line here, compared to what each town is currently assessing or currently paying from resources. So Amherst, under the current methodology, would be paying approximately $53,000 more than today's tax levy resources. Pelham, $202,000 less. Leverett, $487,000 less. Shutesbury would be paying $150,000 more. Net total, $482,000. So that's the same number you saw on Mac's slide, but notice the difference for each community. 2 communities would be paying more than today. 2 communities would be paying less than today. And understand again, current methodology, enrollment. Statutory methodology, where wealth is factored in. Same total, but now Amherst would pay $215,000 more. Pelham, almost the same. Leverett, $390 savings. Shutesbury, $106 less. So the totals remain the same, but look at the impact difference per community. Why? The top is on enrollment. The bottom factors in wealth. And that came about with the Education Reform Act, 1993, where the legislative intent was that wealthier communities should pay more for education than less wealthy communities. And that is the major impact between these 2 numbers. But it's important to understand this. So the current methodology, Amherst would be paying $53,000 more. But if we went to the statutory methodology, Amherst would be paying $215,000 more. Pelham, enrollment methodology, current methodology, be paying $202,000, $203,000 less. And under the statutory methodology, $202,000 less. Almost the same. Leverett, current methodology, $487 less. Under the statutory methodology, $390,000 less. In Shutesbury, $154,000 more under the current methodology, enrollment methodology, would be paying $106,000 less because of the statutory methodology. Why? Because under the ed reform formula, when wealth is considered, Shutesbury is considered the less wealthiest of the 4 communities, and therefore would get relief under the statutory method, but not under the current enrollment method. So you see, you're sitting here looking at these numbers, each from each community saying, well, one town benefits over another town, and depending upon which methodology you choose, there will be an impact. But remember, we're talking about a region here, and how do we equitably recover these costs and spread those estimated savings. So would the new pre-K to 6 region cost the towns more than today? And the answer is no. It would not cost more than what you're currently spending today in total. But as you saw, the assessment impacts the towns differently. 3 reasons why it's not going to cost you more tomorrow than today. One is you're investing significantly in your school systems today. 2, the region is eligible for additional state and other funds. And 3, because there is, in certain areas, a reduction of costs. So look at the first, that each community is investing in its education system. And this tab and the next 3 slides are the same profile from the DESE website that looks at Chapter 70 trends since the inception of ed reform back in 1993. So on the bottom, you see the years starting in 1993 when ed reform first came in. And these are actual numbers through 2011, budget numbers for 2012. And the red represents Chapter 78. The diagonal blue represents what we call a foundation budget, the legal target of spending determined by the state. The black line, dotted line, is what we call the net school spending requirement. And this blue diagonal line is what the towns are spending actually today. So this diagonal blue column here is the target of spending, and this is the actual. So look at the gap from Amherst. Amherst is spending well above their requirement. Pelham, well above their requirement. Leverett, well above the requirement. Shutesbury, well above the requirement. So let's just go back and highlight a couple of other things. We said that the formula has a heavy weight on wealth. And that's reflected in what you receive in Chapter 78 as well. So in Amherst gets a lot of Chapter 78. See the red? See the size of that red? Pelham, not as much. Shutesbury, not as much. I'm sorry, thank you. Leverett, not as much. And then you would expect Shutesbury to be more because of what you saw in the statutory assessment methodology. So this comes right off of the DESE website, and this is clearly available to you. And behind these numbers is a table that shows you the 20-year history of ed reform financing, foundation enrollment, foundation budget, Chapter 78, local contributions, the required local contribution, and then the actual, and then, as we said, the excess or the amount over the requirement. So all 4 communities are investing a lot in education. The second reason why it wouldn't cost you more to regionalize is that you are eligible for new state and other aid. Chapter 71, transportation reimbursement, $262,000 as we talked about. Bonus aid, roughly $80,000. In the first year, $239,000 over the 5-year period. And as Max said, it's not in the state budget. The Senate and the House adds this every year. In all of the regionalizations that have preceded this, every regionalization has received bonus aid. Medicaid reimbursement, as we talked about, not a new source of money, but moved from the towns, particularly Amherst, over to the new region. And possible transition aid. And the third reason is there is some reduction of costs, particularly in the Union 28 expenses. All right, let's talk about transition aid for a minute. What is the possible impact of transitional costs? Transitional costs have been estimated and broken down into an ongoing basis and one-time costs. All ongoing costs have been included in this analysis for year 1 of the regionalization, even though some of these costs might actually come in over a longer period. But one-time costs have been excluded. The legislature has provided what is sometimes termed transitional aid. It's really grants, but they call it transitional aid in the past, but it's at the request of every district, and it's based on the district's transitional plan and the costs associated with the plan, and there is no line item in the state budget for this purpose. Transitional aid could cover all of those one-time transitional costs. Again, those transitional costs, a lot of them are included in this analysis, but funds to offset the transitional costs have not been included. Why? Because I have no idea, and none of us have any idea what that amount might be. On the other hand, Air Shirley received $300,000 in transitional aid. They were the first to regionalize 3 years ago? Yes. 3 years ago. 2 years ago, Somerset Berkeley formed their region. We're still waiting to hear officially what amount of transitional aid they received. Monomoy, the new Chatham-Howard regionalization, $274,000 in transitional aid. They were the third. So, are you going to get transitional aid? Probably. Definitely, can't say. How much? No idea. It won't be $300,000 because that was the first, and the transitional aid kitty has been reduced. But whatever the final number is, and right now we've got it at $482,000, that does not include transitional aid. We know that Amherst Pelham has applied for transitional funding through the CIC grant and may ask for more transitional funding. So again, one-time transitional costs are not included. We've included the ongoing cost adjustments in these numbers, and we have excluded any transitional aid as potential revenues. So when compared to the current districts in the pre-K to 6 region, what would be the financial impact of a full pre-K to 12? All right, up to now we've talked pre-K to 6. We saw a lot of change in revenues, new revenues. We saw some adjustments in costs. There are to be efficiencies gained. Having to work with a line between the entities in terms of allocation of resources, the bill back of services, the redundancies regarding school committee meetings, 4 town meetings, 4 this, 4 that, 110 reports, etc. Not to mention multiple contracts. But the estimated savings we consider to be minimal at this time because we don't see any staff reductions at this time. Later into regionalization, we believe there will be a lot of savings, but we need a long-term education plan on which to base the financial analysis. The real benefit, as Mac mentioned, and it's not a financial one, is the improved effectiveness that a superintendent will gain by having a larger region to deal with. We do know that in the current setup, we've basically got 5 data reports, 5 of the end of the year financial reports, 5 different systems of paying checks, 5 different charts of accounts, 5 of this, 5 of that, and if you add the superintendency unions, 7 school committees. A pre-K to 6 region would eliminate that and become more efficient by having a set of 2s. And a pre-K to 12 would even further create greater efficiency by having one set, one end of the year report, one financial system, one payroll system, one vendor system, one chart of accounts, one school committee, 1-1-1. Going from 5 to 2 to 1, tremendous savings down the road. So as you saw in one of the first summaries, what is the amount to be assessed relative to a pre-K to 12? What is the big picture? We basically took the same format. On the left is what you saw earlier with the pre-K to 6, and then on the far right is the 7 to 12. Same type of analysis, starting with the gross budget and ratcheting it down to an amount to be assessed, which would include an additional $17 million on the 7 through 12 level, for a total amount to be assessed of roughly $37.8 million. Running that bigger number through the assessment methodologies, same setup as you saw before. Current methodology on the top, which is based on what? Enrollment. Statutory method on the bottom, which is based on what? Wealth. So you would expect to see different bottom line impacts, right? So Amherst, Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury have a different set of numbers, where Amherst, under the current methodology, would be paying $235,000 more, but under the statutory methodology, $160,000 more. Pelham, $609,000 less under the current methodology. Pelham, $237,000 less under the statutory. Leverett, $425,000, $166,000. Shutesbury going from more, $316,000, to $238,000 savings. We're back to the $482,000, but you see the spread, pre-K to 12, has different impacts on all 4 communities than the pre-K through 6. In summary, the estimated fiscal 13 pre-K to 6 regional budget compares favorably to the fiscal 13 independent pre-K to 6 elementary school budgets. The pre-K to 6 net regional costs are less than the independent pre-K to 6 costs for the 4 towns. And I'm using the term, thanks to Mike, net regional costs, because some of this is from additional revenues coming in, and some of this are for true savings. The new region, in either model, is eligible for regional transportation reimbursement for the K through 6, $262,000. The newly formed region in either model would be eligible for that bonus aid, $79,700 first year, $239,000 over the 5 years. The Medicaid reimbursement we talked about. And you may, hopefully will, receive transitional aid. And so when we looked at the pre-K assessments, current methodology, statutory methodology, and the pre-K through 12 assessments, current methodology, enrollment, statutory methodology, we saw some towns benefiting significantly and some towns not benefiting as much. In fact, some towns paying more. So as a region, consider developing an assessment methodology that is more consistent with current resources so that all 4 communities spread the savings, spread the benefits, so that one community isn't paying more, so that regionalization, while bottom line is about a $500,000 benefit today, that all 4 can share in that, and that would require a hybrid methodology somewhere between the statutory and the enrollment. So in conclusion, positive fiscal impact to regionalize pre-K to 6, to regionalize pre-K to 12. And thank you for your attention for this financial presentation.
Okay, so I guess this is the point where we're going to collect questions from people. A couple members of the board are going to go around if you have questions, written questions. For those of you who came in late, we're just taking written questions. We have the forms coming up in each of the 4 towns on the yellow sheet of paper from the handout table, where it will be a lively exchange. Maybe not. Do we want to share reading them, or do you want me to just read them? I'm happy to allow this to go. Okay. Anything else I should say? I don't know. I did neglect to mention that the bathrooms are down this way, for those of you who aren't familiar with this building. Okay. Did you want to sort them? Okay.
And people are not marking what kind of question it is, so we're going to get to try and sort that out.
Okay. The board members are going to sort the questions so we,
After we read them.
for duplication and that kind of thing. Am I reading people's names? I don't think I will read people's names.
Okay, this is a financial question.
I've got finance here. Why don't you start?
Or do you want to do education? Do you want to put their, all right. Do I want to share reading them, or do you want me to?
No, you can go ahead.
Or do you want to share?
Just read them one at a time, and then,
Yeah.
because the ones we think we can get to, and
Okay.
try and combine them as we go.
These are,
It's education.
okay, these are all finance.
All right.
These are education.
I, repeat the question.
The question that was just asked, I'll take a moment to respond to it, repeat the question, and then respond to it, and that'll give the people who are to my right, they're trying to sort the questions into groupings that are most logical. The question, I think, was whether there would be an ability to ask later questions after today, and what is the process for doing that. There is a, when you look at regionalschoolplanning.org, sundayschools.com, which is the website that has all of the materials that we've been putting together available. There is a link to provide direct access and ask questions and send comments directly to us. So that is one way, is to go through the website, and to the extent that we're capable of doing it, and it depends upon the volume, we will do our best to respond to those questions, and we will do our best to make sure that responses and that questions and responses that we receive in that manner are posted. It depends upon the volume as to how workable that's going to be, but we certainly want to do the best that we can. The other thing is that we encourage all of you to attend the forum in your town so that you can follow up with your members of the school district planning board who are from your community, and any others who are there, to ask questions there, as well as to engage in a discussion of regionalization and questions and concerns, and give feedback to the members who are representing your community. So with that, Wendy, are you ready to?
I am. I'm
Okay.
to keep this going, I'm not going to put anything in any more order than we've got them. So I'll ask some of the some basic questions I see here. Someone has a question. What is the circuit breaker program? If you could explain that.
Circuit breaker. It's a
Thanks.
SPED, special education reimbursement program. Each district submits costs that are 4 times foundation to DESE, and they reimburse based on some percent, which is around somewhere between 60 and 70%. So it's a reimbursement SPED program sponsored by the state.
If I could just add, it's for very costly special education. Over a certain amount, you get then some percentage of that back.
Yeah, and what he was referring to was very costly students. I referred to 4 times foundation. Foundation, let's call it roughly $10,000. So any SPED student greater than $40,000 would be eligible for state reimbursement under the circuit breaker program. Clearer? Individual students, yes.
Okay. Another basic question of explanation. What is the foundation enrollment formula? Medication reimbursement and medication, I guess it's and medication reimbursement for, excuse me?
Medicare.
I'm sorry, Medicaid reimbursement for, and is Leverett spending the non-student today? School choice, is that what the question is, the
No,
non-student?
the Medicaid reimbursement for Leverett.
Right.
Foundation enrollment, the definition is any resident student in your community going to a public school, regardless which public school he or she is attending. So it includes your resident student headcount in your community, plus any choice out, charter out of your community. But it would not include charter in, choice in, because that would be foundation enrollment of a different district. Or vocational schools, right, public school. Right. Second question was what, Wendy? I'm sorry.
What'd I do with that? It's here.
Leverett's
Okay.
Medicaid. Mike, you want to?
Yeah.
Leverett's Medicare.
Did you hear the answer?
Roughly 17,000 on Leverett. Right.
Let me just
Question get answered?
The microphone is very important because of Amherst Media. We want to make this useful projection. To the extent that information is provided from the audience, as it just was, we need to repeat that. It isn't because we think you aren't listening to the person behind you, but it won't be on the Amherst Media presentation, and that's very important to us.
Okay, 2 school choice questions. I'll just read them both. Pelham brings in school choice money by bringing in half its students from outside the district now under a regional approach. What happens to those kids in dollars? And this just says school choice in all schools. And I know that some of the board members could and would like to answer these questions. So actually, I just have the microphone here, but would you? On school choice? Yeah. Okay. You don't want me to? Okay, back to the financial people.
Any intra-district choice, as I said earlier, roughly 197,000. As individual elementary districts would be a revenue to one and a tuition expense to another. When you combine them into one region, they offset each other, and there is no intra-district choice because they're all part of the same region. Okay, the second part is, what if you have students coming in from another town, Belchertown, for example, sends a lot of kids. That isn't going to change, and the revenues coming in would now belong to the region as school choice in, and similarly, any student going out of Amherst, Pelham, Shutesbury, and Leverett, thank you, would be a tuition out, but now from the region, not from the town.
I'd like to add a little bit to that question's answer, just because it sounded to me like it was something more of a policy question, because I know that Amherst, Leverett, and Pelham do have school choice, and Shutesbury does not, and has maintained that position. And the question of school choice is something that would have to be determined by the regional school committee if there is a full region. So it is not something that we can set in the regional agreement. It is voted on every year, and so by the school committee, and so that's something that would be coming up every single year, and we could make it, I mean, it always happens that the principals have a say in it, the superintendent has a say in how many students are going to be in each of the buildings and in each of the classrooms, and so that's kind of, although it's a regional school committee issue, it's also part of the superintendent and the principal's issue also. So that's a yearly thing that we would have to be discussing.
Where are the costs for buildings and their maintenance, et cetera? What could the figure look like if the buildings were leased or purchased? How do these expenses affect the numbers presented today? If buildings not included, how can there be a $500,000 savings?
The building maintenance costs are included in each of the 4 elementary budgets and have been brought forward and into the regional budget. So they are in there. Should you change from leasing to purchasing, that would change the numbers, but we're using fiscal 13 numbers today. Wendy, was there a third part?
I think there are 4 parts. If the building's not included, how can there be a $500,000 savings? But you said they are, correct?
Right. Now, what's not included is future costs that Mac referred to in terms of possible renovations. Since they're not part of the fiscal 13 budget, they are not part of this analysis.
Okay. Who would pay outstanding debt service? would assessments for each town change over the years as demographics change? This is a two-part question. So that if census data saw Amherst getting poor relative to the other towns, its assessment would drop and their something increase.
Repeat the first part, please.
Who would pay outstanding debt service?
Okay. Right now, the towns are paying for existing debt service. The towns will continue to pay for existing debt service so that it doesn't run through the assessment formula. Future debt service that the region would incur for decisions made after regionalization would be borne by the region. With respect to the future, if you switch to a wealth-based formula, be it statutory or some other hybrid, where wealth would be part of that assessment. Right now, again, it's enrollment, so no wealth factors. The EQV is updated every other year in the Chapter 70 formula. The other part of the wealth is what is known as aggregate income, and that's updated every year. Those figures are provided to DESE by DOR. So again, those numbers change every year. EQV every other year, income every year, and it's all relative to the changes within other districts in the Commonwealth.
I could add something to that. And you'll see in my report that there are options for future debt. It's possible to write in their regional agreement. For example, I mentioned that there are 2 schools in Amherst that may need some attention in the foreseeable future. It's possible to write in the regional agreement that wherever the school is located, that community would be 100% responsible for the debt on that project. It could be written in the agreement that it's going to be based on enrollment so that everybody chips in, assuming that over some period of time there will be debt incurred on all 4 communities, and that would even off. A third option that I've seen considered is that it, especially for only for an elementary school, the debt would be based on the percentage of kids from that community in that school. So let's say, for example, just in round numbers, there were 100 students in the school. 80 of them were from the town where the building is located, and 20 were from other towns in the region. Well, that town where the school is would pay 80% of the debt, and the other towns would share the other 20% based on the percentage of kids they have in that school. So there are different ways of doing that, but as Mark said, basically the region would take responsibility for the new debt.
I'm going to direct this to Andy. Are the consultants going to be available at the town forums? If not, where do we get answers to the educational and financial questions?
We don't have a budget and really can't ask the consultants to come back 4 times for 4 different town forums. And I've been thinking about this because we've been getting a lot of very good questions that are being submitted to us, and we just invited more questions to come later. So we will need to continue to find a mechanism to get questions to our consultants and get them back to us in an orderly fashion. And I think that we're going to have to use our website to try and find a way to get the questions and further responses to anything that we're able to do in that method available to everybody, because it's information that is being asked by one person, but as you're finding today, is useful to everyone. The one additional thing that I should say is that when I introduced the board earlier, there's one member of the board who's not present because he's very ill and he has the flu, and we didn't want him to give the flu to everybody else. But Michael DeChiara from the Shutesbury School Committee is the one who's not present. And I wanted to mention Michael because he is the one who is the webmaster of the website, and despite being home with the flu yesterday, was busily posting all of this stuff on the website, and we just want to recognize what all he's done for the board. Wendy?
I'm going to read a few that are kind of directed around the variations among the towns. It is said that an earlier financial analysis was submitted by consultants showing Shutesbury a financial loser. The report was sent back for more work. What work? And an underlying question is, will this report be made available? So, Andy, that may be for you again.
Well, I will leave the question of explaining the changes to Mark, but to answer the question, the draft that was submitted last week was based on very preliminary data, and a lot of people looked at the preliminary data and saw that there was things that needed to be done to make the presentation as clear as possible and to address some questions that came up about the initial data. And so that I think that the changes were really just to make sure that we were using the most accurate information possible. Because we don't want to create any misconceptions, and because the people are interested, we will make that available and we'll post it online, the prior report that the board considered, and we'll do that sometime next week. But I do want to encourage everybody to not focus on a preliminary report that was reviewed and then revised, but to remember that today's report is the report. And I don't know if Mark has anything he wants to add.
I do want to comment on the term loser, because you have before you one analysis that will cost each community more through one assessment than a different analysis with a different assessment. And therein lies a challenge for the new interim and final school committee as to the governance and what assessment methodology would be fairer, so that there is no loser in a regionalization. We could all be very myopic and look at this from an individual town perspective and see the winners and losers under each one of these scenarios. On the other hand, you are a region, and in order for a region to be successful, we've got to come to some fairness, some equity in several aspects, one of which is the assessment methodology. And there are examples of hybrids that can blend both wealth factors and enrollment factors to smooth out a winners and losers so that all become winners in this from a financial perspective.
Okay. I have a couple questions. I think they're similar here. What is driving?
Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can I add to that?
No, I think we'd rather not at this point. Let's get more questions in.
Okay. What is driving the large credits for Pelham and Leverett in both formulas in comparison to Amherst and Shutesbury? And why such a big difference in assessments between PK6 versus PK12, for example, in Shutesbury?
Any ideas? This is a good time for you to hear from Matt. I've been waiting to get him involved.
Okay. Well, luckily we were discussing this over here prior to this question being asked amongst the group. I think the answer lies with the Chapter 70 numbers, if we were to focus on that, because Pelham and Leverett pay less today, or I'm sorry, they don't pay. They receive less Chapter 70 aid today than Shutesbury, for example. The number is pretty significant if you were to look at one of the slides that has it on there. So they're receiving less aid, therefore they have less aid to pay for the expenses. However, when you look at it from a regional perspective, there's more of a spread the wealth aspect when it comes to Chapter 70 aid. So I guess you could look at it like their aid would get bumped up a little bit from a regional perspective.
And if I could add, the Shutesbury is considered the least wealthiest, therefore would have the less contribution, would, as a region, contribute a little more than the others relative to Chapter 70 aid, which becomes regional aid. Hopefully that helps.
Okay. Amherst has more low-income children than the other towns. Why then does Amherst pay more under the statutory approach, which considers wealth, than it does under the current approach? And could you define town-based costs again?
I can answer the second question. The second question is, can I define town-based costs again? Those costs that are incurred by the town on behalf of the schools that the town pays for. So the town today, for example, is paying for the 7 through 12 regional assessment. So that's a town-based cost. They're paying for the retirement assessment. They're paying for the debt service. The first part of that question, why is Amherst, that has more ELL kids,
Low-income children.
low-income children, paying more? Is that
Under the statutory,
under the
which has a
statutory?
wealth factor, than it does under the current system, methodology.
You know that? Okay.
Statutory method isn't measuring the number of low-income kids in the school, it's measuring 50% wealth to town, 50% property value, so it really, I don't think it's necessarily, especially a place like the
The audience answer is the property wealth factors are EQV and are income and don't reflect enrollment. But where I hesitated is there is also a fact, no, since the, there, all right, 1 minute on technicalities. There is a second test in the formula, which is based on foundation budget, which is based on foundation enrollment in most part, which then would take into consideration the mix of students. And low-income students would receive a higher rate, and therefore the town with the most low-income students would have a bigger bump in the foundation budget. Someday you might be under that test of the formula, but today you're not. Today you are wealth-based, and therefore your answer makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
We have several more questions, and it's 3:15, so we'll,
And I got a couple
on.
more over here that you
Yeah.
don't have, Wendy.
okay. While we're on this, though, because this I know is a big question, how is the methodology selected?
How is the assessment methodology
Yes.
selected?
Yes, I assume.
The assessment methodology is the current 5-year rolling enrollment average that is used at the region 7 through 12. So we applied that to the K through 6 and the pre-K through 12.
Actually, the methodology that's used for assessment, the final one, it is by law the statutory method, but every year, as you might all recall at town meeting, we vote to do the current methodology, which is what we do for the 7 through 12 method. And the reason we do that, once again, we've always talked about how Shutesbury has lower income, et cetera, but it basically homogenizes the cost to educate a child in a classroom, so that if you have 2 children in a classroom, in a 6th grade classroom, that one of them is from Shutesbury, one of them is from Amherst, the towns pay the same for that education in our current method. Under the statutory method, one town would pay one cost for the child in one desk, and another town would pay a different cost for a child in the desk next to them. So that's why we have always had the current method, but the current method is the one that you have to vote in every year to use. Which is enrollment-based. But once again, that could be different depending on what we settle on in the regional agreement. But again, would be voted on every year.
Because it's almost 20 minutes after our expected closure time, we are going to stop reading and answering questions, but my understanding is that they will all be recorded, posted, and responded to on somebody, say where? On the website, okay. Does that information in our materials that people have, the access to the website? Is that on them? Okay.
So it's up to me to tell you what the next steps are, if I can get this low enough so that I can talk into it. So once again, we have a lot of information here in front of us. It was presented to us only last week at the board, and now to you. It's on the website. The next step is for everybody to really sit down and read it, to try to understand it, to formulate questions. I think these are great questions. I've been reading the questions. I'm sorry that we didn't have enough time for all of them, but the next step is really to get involved. Get your neighbors involved. I wish this whole room had been full, but I appreciate the fact that you all have come, and I really want us to act on it. So, as it says here, from February to March, we'd like you to share what we have so far. The forums in each town, there is a handout in the back, but I'm going to read through them. February 13th is the Amherst Forum. It's at 7 p.m. in the Regional High School Library. February 27th at 6:30 is the Shutesbury Forum, and that's in the elementary school. On February 28th is the Leverett Forum. That's at 6:30 at the Leverett Elementary School. And the Pelham Forum is on March 2nd at 10 a.m. in the Ramsdell room of the Pelham Library Complex. Please come. Please bring other people with you. Your local members of the Regional School District Planning Board, your 3 local members, will be there to answer questions, to talk, to have a dialogue. This is a presentation today, and those are going to be dialogues. Please come to as many as you would like. Don't restrict yourself to just your town if you don't want to. Get involved and come to these meetings. On March 9th, the planning board is going to make a decision as to whether to go forward or not with this process. That's why we need you to be involved between now and March 9th. We are going to base our decision not only on these reports, but on what we hear from our members of our towns. So it's up to you to let us know how you feel. I'm not going to take a question now. It's up to you to let us know. So, once again, get involved. March 9th, we will decide, first of all, whether we are going to go forward with regionalization, and second of all, which model we will be going forward with. So that's a very important meeting. Okay, if we decide to go forward as of March 9th, we have a lot of work to do. The board is going to have to develop a proposed structure for the new region. It's going to have to craft a regional agreement. It's going to have to craft an education plan. It's going to have to craft a financial plan. We're going to have to continue to investigate all those significant questions that we have determined, and you'll see them on our website, and we'll have to get answers to those, figure out how we can address them, if they're supposed to be addressed in the regional agreement, if we're going to have to go on good faith with some of them. Stay tuned. That's going to be a lot of work between March and November. Additionally, between March and November, we're going to keep you involved. Once again, our meetings are open. We meet quite often. We usually meet at about 6 o'clock at night in the professional development room of the middle school here. We make our meeting, we post our meetings wherever we can so that you can have posting of them. Always go to our website, once again, regionalschoolplanning.com, and you'll find posting of when our meetings are. But we are going to have you involved in additional forums. April, July, and October are going to be the forums. We're going to include the current staff in the process. We are going to look the regional agreement over, and then we're going to present it to town meetings in Leverett, Pelham, and Shutesbury. And then to Amherst, it's going to be a special election vote because it has to be all of the residents of the towns. And so we don't want you going to your town meeting and hearing about it for the first time. So please be prepared and prepare your neighbors also. Hopefully each one of you will bring at least 2 other people to your town forums and continue this process. As I said, town meeting in November, it's usually our special town meeting in November, is when we will have a townwide vote. The idea of going forward with a regional school district is voted on by the townspeople. And so everyone has a vote in this, and as I said, it'll be a town meeting in Leverett, Pelham, and Shutesbury, and an Amherst vote in a special election. After November, it ramps up, if you can think it can. If we get approved by the voters, then we have to go to the Department of Education and Elementary and Secondary Education. They actually have to approve our plan in December. If they approve it, then we begin our transition, and the transitional timing will make it so that our new region would begin in July 1st of 2014. I want to leave you with our values that guide us. The Regional School District Planning Board, as everyone has said to you, and I hope you realize, has put a tremendous amount of effort into this process. There have been countless hours of meetings. We have had wonderful consult from our specialists. It's been great to have financial and educational consultants with us because in the past, and I have sat on this type of board before, in the past, we can only get so far with volunteers. It's really, really hard to go through those financial forms and paperwork and try to equalize and answer all the questions. We're not going to answer all the questions, and we can start with that premise put aside because we're going to try as hard as we can, but it's a learning process. And I know that there are probably people in these towns who have been in this in the towns since we regionalized 7 through 12. I don't know that process. I wasn't here then, but I'm sure it wasn't smooth sailing the first year, the second year, the third year. Now it is. And now we've come to trust our 7 through 12 region. So that's kind of the way we should be going forward with this. It's not a smooth process. If we continue on this process, there'll be bumpy roads ahead, but we are trying to be good stewards, to be fiscally responsible, to provide opportunities for your input, to learn about, respect, and reflect the culture of the different communities, and that is a real major one that we have been trying to stress. And also, we want to maintain our schools and the best features of all our schools. So I thank you for being here. We will answer all your questions. We'll put them all up on the website. I'm sorry we didn't get to them, but thank you for being here.